But Naomi, welcome. Lovely to have you here. We've given you a little intro already,
Oh, great.
spoken a bit about your books and what you've been doing for being a voice for young people. Um, would you like to tell me a little bit more about how you sort of got involved in home education?
So I home educated my own children who are now teenagers and are moved on. But yes, right at the beginning, I felt quite strongly that that school was not going to be the right place for my children. I was already a developmental psychologist, and when I went round visiting the local schools, including excellent schools, I just had this kind of discomfort between the mismatch between how I knew children develop and what schools were offering to those children, particularly the kind of early years at that point. It was obviously 4 and 5 and 6 year olds. And I could see, I think at one of the schools we visited, I was given a list of key words that my son was meant to learn over the summer. My son was 3 at the time because he was very young in his year and he turned 4 just before starting. And I just thought, this is absolute madness. He's nowhere. This is just not where he is right now. And we're going to have a horrible summer if I spend my summer trying to get him to read these words. So I decided that instead we would take a different route and we would home educate them. It was a big decision for us. I had to give up my job, which is a job I loved. And yeah, it was a huge thing to do. But now looking back, I'm delighted that we did it. I think my son's 17 now. He's just starting college. And it was absolutely the right thing to do at that stage. Yeah. So that's
And
how I got
and
into home education.
yeah, and what was your experience of home education? And I mean, that's obviously led you to what you're doing now. So I'd love to
hmm
hear a bit about that journey.
So I think, like lots of people at the beginning, I thought we would more or less replicate school. I thought that we would have a timetable of different things that we do, and I ordered books on learning to read and all that kind of thing. And then it became really clear, quite obvious, quite quickly that my children weren't up for that. And I thought, oh well, if I'm going to home educate them, school is there, and I'm choosing to not send them to school, so maybe I should choose to do something really quite different. And that was what we did. So we were very child-led in those early years. We were unschoolers. We just did a lot more playing. And I think I had the confidence to do that partly because I know about the research of how good play is for children, but also the longer that I did it, the longer that was home with my children, the more I saw evidence of them learning through play. And that was really what kept me going. I could see because it's quite scary in those early years. Like when my children were 5 or 6 or 7, they didn't learn to read, and the children who were at school were learning to read. So our friends who'd gone to school, their children, we'd go out with them, and their children would read the signs, and my children would just be completely blank. And I'd like have this awful feeling that maybe I was letting them down, failing them, that I should be teaching them to read, but they were not interested in learning how to read at that point. And I think so the big moments for me, my son started to learn to read when he was 8. And the way I first knew that he'd started to learn to read was because he looked at a road sign and he said, "Does that say zombie?" And he played Minecraft a lot. And Minecraft, the things come with words attached. It's a great game. And it wasn't a word it didn't say zombie. The road sign said zone. And I was like, oh, well, you're working something out there, aren't you? You're seeing words and you're making connections. And from then on, for him, it was all about road signs. Quite quickly, he was reading Way Out and Tesco and that
Oh
kind of
yeah.
thing. Yeah. And my daughter had a really different route into reading, and hers was much more intentional. She didn't learn to read when she was 8, and she was still at 10 or 11, was still not really a confident reader. And then she said to me, "I want to learn to read. Will you help me learn to read?" And I said, yes, of course I will. And at the time I thought, I was still schooled, maybe I thought we'd order a scheme or something. And she was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to read Toto and Silver, the Ninja Cats, which is a chapter book, which I had read to her several times and which she'd listened to the audiobook. And she said, I think that would be a good book to start to learn to read with because I know it. I was like, okay. So that's what we did. We spent a whole summer with Toto and Silver the Ninja Cats, and we would just open it together and we would read it together. And by the end of that summer, she was reading. And now, so she's just turned 14 now, and now she is an avid reader. She doesn't ever stop reading. She's always got a book with her. And her reading, I'm sure her reading age now is way above what other 14-year-olds might have, but it's amazing. So, and I think with both of my children, they both really enjoy reading now. And that's been a huge thing for me, seeing that late reading outside the school system doesn't have to mean that you become a reluctant reader. It means that you can become a passionate reader, really, for both of my kids.
So did that lead to, would you say there was an
Mm.
aha moment, some of that? Are there any sort of other aha moments
There
that
were
stand
lots
out
of
for you?
aha
Huh.
moments, yes. But I think what kind of led to me writing my books, and particularly my first book, We're Changing Our Minds, was this feeling that I was watching something unfold which most people didn't know about. That most people's children went to school, and when you go to school, you assume that this is the best way to learn. If you don't go to school, you won't learn. And we tell children that, don't we? We say all the time, that school's where you go to learn, and if you don't go to school, you won't learn. We all imbibe that as adults. I think having been myself, I went to a lot of school. I was told that a lot. Um, and to see how my children would learn things so differently and in their own time, and I started to feel more and more that it wasn't that we were missing out. Whereas I think previously there was often a feel like, oh, yeah, they're missing out on this. Don't you worry, they'll miss out on this. And I was like, well, actually, the more I see it, the more I worry that the school children are missing out, actually, because we're doing so much more. But also, I felt that they were learning how they learned. So
Yeah.
like when my daughter said, "Oh, this is how I want to learn how to read," she was right. She did
Yeah.
know how she wanted to learn how to read. And I think that's a really powerful thing for a young person to be able to say, this is how I learn best, and this is how I can do it. And I think that's one of the things, unfortunately, we take away from children at school sometimes, that we tell them this is how you learn, and we just present it to them.
Well, there's no, like only, it's almost like people act like there's only one right answer,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yeah. John Holt writes that, doesn't he? That schools are temples to the right answer. We've just got to find the
Yeah.
right answer, and that's it. And actually, there are many, many right answers. There are many ways to gain an education. There are many routes through education. And I think the way I think about it now is that, particularly for those children who don't really fit into the school mold earlier on, so particularly those children who are maybe really active, really want to be out there, who are maybe still really want more time at home, are really attached to their parents, aren't ready to separate, particularly for those children, I think home education can offer something which means that when they come through to being teenagers and adolescents, they haven't had lots of the damaging experiences related to learning that sometimes unfortunately happen to children at school. So that was definitely one of the motivations for me. I was worried that if my children did go to school, that one of the things that they might learn is learning is boring, and also that they weren't good learners because they weren't ready to be doing the things that school was asking of them at that stage. So what I wanted them, my aim for my children really has been that I wanted them to grow up thinking of themselves as competent learners, thinking of themselves as people who could learn things that they wanted to learn and that had meaning to them. Yeah, and I think that's happened. And I think it's the kind of thing you can't see until they're
Yeah.
teenagers. Then you're like, oh, that was what it was all about, all those years of playing.
Well, what do you think the government are getting wrong at the moment in the education system that we are seeing such a huge exodus
Of
of young
children and
people from,
people, young
yeah, yeah,
people.
yeah. I mean, I know it's like,
Yes.
where do you begin? But where do you
Um,
begin?
so I think one of the things that they're getting wrong is there's a focus on compulsion and on the idea that every I think you lose something really important when you lose the idea that children come to school or come to education or whatever it is because they want to be there. And I think with this focus on education, we've lost that. It's been you come because you must be here. And it doesn't actually matter too much what's happening in those school walls. You must be here anyway. And I think with COVID, a lot of young people and a lot of their parents saw what got sort of close up. The parents got a better view on what was happening in the school gates. And a lot of them were like, hang on a minute, this isn't really very interesting. This isn't, like parents would say to me, I discovered what they're doing and it's tedious what they're spending their time on. And I think the government needs to be turning around thinking, what can we be offering to our young people that makes it worth their while, that they would want to come to? And I think our kind of the focus on test results, the focus on exams at every level, we've brought in, the government have brought in many more tests at different ages and different levels, have just made everything about outcome and not about process. And yet childhood is all about process. Childhood is all about doing things and exploring things and learning things.
But with all the researchers and psychologists and sense specialists, and the list is sort of endless, saying, and teachers
Mm,
saying, something's got to change. This is not working. Yet the changes we see are generally, I don't know, they tend to be sort of cosmetic, I would say superficial, and
Yeah.
geared not so much towards the children as to what works for the convenience of the school and the managing of children.
Yes, I think it's something to do about the view we have of childhood in our culture, which is about a time when children must be made to do things, must be trained, must be made to jump through hoops. But I also think, unfortunately, that there's been a kind of focus on the outcome of the education system being exam results, and good exam results are what measures a school. Schools therefore have got a lot of pressure on them. And I think the government have really bought into that. They think that getting good exam results is what means a good system. And to me, that seems completely illogical because the way that our exam results work, the way that GCSEs work, is that they are actually designed on a curve so that a third of children are always going to fail. There's no Whatever you do in that education system, you're never going to have 100% pass rate at GCSE just because of the way the exams are designed. So it's like a kind of fool's errand to me. It's like, does someone not understand that this is going to be the case? No matter what we do, the third of them are going to fail. And that's partly because GCSEs are designed as a way to discriminate between young people. So they're not a test like the driving test, which is a test of whether you're competent or not, you know. So the driving test is just can you drive? They don't mind whether everybody on one day gets passes or fails. It's just about can you drive safely. GCSE is about who's the best, who's the middle, who's the worst, so that you can decide who gets to go on to A levels, who gets to go on to this. So it's a sorting process, and I think that's not a great way to conduct a general education of our young people because it means that a third of them end up as failures. A third of them get to 16 and are told you're the failures of the system, which again is a terrible way to start adult life,
Well,
really.
it puts a ceiling on children, doesn't it?
Yeah, it
There's
does.
an artificial ceiling.
Yes, and it's measured against a very narrow yardstick, a really narrow, GCSEs are such a narrow yardstick, such a specific way of thinking
Yeah.
that you have to do in order to get good results at GCSE. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I think, well,
so we're kind of getting towards the end of your little 15-minute slot.
oh yeah, great.
But I'm sure you've got some messages you'd like to get out there. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to.
Okay.
You're very articulate. I'm sure you can do it. But what do you feel is like a really important message to get out there to home educators and to educators, to government officials?
I think the most important message is there are lots of different ways to gain an education, that there is never one size fits all. We will never have a school system that fits everybody. We need variety. Children need different things at different times in their education. And for home educators, I think keeping the faith is really important, particularly in those early years, in those primary years where it can seem like everybody's soaring ahead and you're, playing Minecraft or playing in the mud or playing with Lego. But that's the foundations of education for children. Actually, that kind of play is really important. And I think we need to shout about it as much as we can.
Well, I've taken to saying more recently that we should never stop playing. So,
Mm,
because play is actually how we learn. And sometimes our play might not look like play to anyone else. But if I'm
yeah,
enjoying learning and I'm getting a real kick out of it, that's my
then it's
play.
like play.
And,
Absolutely.
I feel like that is we need to get that message out to adults and to children alike.
Yeah.
Um, but it's the whole thing,
Learning
like,
can be fun, really, is
yeah.
part of this. Learning doesn't have to be a slog in the way that many children learn that it is at school.
And one of the things I like to ask adults who question home education, I'll say to them, do you think you learned more in school or you learned more once you left school? I mean, normally
Yeah.
they need to be out of school a couple of years for them to have
Before
an
they were.
idea. Yeah. And then they'll normally say, oh, yeah, actually, I think I probably learned more after I left school. And I'll say, well,
Yeah.
why was that? And I'll say, well, they'll say, because I was actually interested in what I was doing and I was passionate about it. And
They
then,
taught themselves into it.
yeah. And then I say to them, so why would it be different for a child?
Mm.
And you see the little light bulb go on, because that is to me, and home education is such a positive thing when you get it as an adult and you get out of the way.
Absolutely. Yeah. You suddenly see a whole different way of learning and you're like, oh, that's what it's about. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's your books are available out there. Yeah. I've put I'm just trying to think if I've put the link out. I need to put a link on the Facebook. I'm managing several platforms,
Don't
so
worry.
not
Yeah.
doing so well at that, but
Yeah.
I will try and make sure all the links are available. I think they are under the YouTube video.
Yes, there's changing
So
our mind and then there's a different
yes,
way to learn. And they're both available on
yeah. And you've
audiobook
got
as
a couple of
well.
other books as well that you've written. So
Yep.
and you blog and you have your Substack and you have a lot going on. And I just want to thank you for being that voice out there that is so much needed today.
Oh, thank you.
Okay,
It's been a great journey.